Hello and welcome to a tutorial on setting up your own locally hosted Xamarin Test Cloud. Unfortunately, we don't have access to the thousands of devices that are available on Test Cloud, but if you wanted to use this method for, say, running your own build agent that will build your sort of app and do testing locally, mainly because there's situations where development teams have their own internal networks, their own internal hardware, third-party devices. Sometimes Test Cloud just does not help us, unfortunately, for a testing workflow where we use third-party devices or internal networks. And I've seen this in many cases now that I thought I would post a tutorial which would be really useful. So this will be a two-part tutorial. First thing I'm going to do is set up the Test Cloud part. And then secondly, I'm going to show you how we can plug this into Visual Studio Team Services into our continuous integration. Alrighty, so to get started, what we are going to do is we're going to look at an Xamarin application called FaceOff. So this is my Samsung device, which is mirrored. So let me remove that. Mirrored from my Samsung S7. And what this device does, pretty cool, this actually Vise is awesome for mirroring any Android device or iOS device. We can actually control also the front end of the device from the computer. It's great. So what this app does, it's an example of emotion recognition through an Azure sort of cognitive service called the Emotion API. We can set that up in about 2 minutes on Azure and plug this into Xamarin. So easy. And I'll also show you another tutorial later on where we can look at how we bring in Azure services or cognitive abilities into our Xamarin applications. So what this does, we type in a first and last name, click Start Game, then click Take Photo, and we'll have to do a selfie looking whatever emotion it wants you to do. And in this case, disrespectful. And I hope that gives me a score. It will analyze my emotion, and an 8.6 disgusted look. It's not very good at all. This Emotion API is fantastic. I mean, look at the details it gives back from facial recognition. Disgust, fear, happiness. How good is that? Alrighty, that's a look at the app that we're going to use. Now let's see how we can adopt some UI tests to this. So I'm going to use a new project called Local UI Tests. Inside our Local UI Test project, we actually have to do a bit of work around our app initializer here. So with Test Cloud, you will need to normally remove these parts, because you don't want to specify what APK or IPA you're using, and you don't want to specify the device you're running on. But locally, we do. So in this case, for my Android app, I want to select my Samsung device, which is plugged into my computer, and that's this one. To do so, all I have to do, let's clear that off. Go into the preferences and grab the SDK location for Android. Hear my computer powering up now because I'm doing so much testing. The boss would like to hear that. And all we are going to do, whoops, sorry about that, one moment. No such file or directory. That's because it's platform tools. Maybe not. Okay. Good start. CD. Alright, we're here. And there's ADB. Sorry, / ADB devices. That's my device serial, and that's my Samsung device. Now let's copy that over here. And that's going to be our device serial. Now our APK file, we want to specify the build output path that our Android code is going to build to. And that's always in our bin debug folder for any debug build. It'll create our signed APK here. APK, excuse me. Now to do so, we simply go to the folder location of our Android project, bin, debug, and this is where the APK is going to always build to every time I build my Android code using msbuild. So what I'm going to do now is we also want to, oops, wrong folder, let's pop back. Okay, so we're in our project folder, and inside here we can use msbuild. You could use xbuild previously, but now that's been deprecated, it's now msbuild. So I highly suggest you stick with the current. msbuild, and we link our csproj file. And see what that's doing? That's going ahead and building the Android code and building us an APK, which we can use with our local UITest folder. So it's going to build that APK into this folder location, and then this is the APK we're going to use to test. Same thing applies for iOS, but in this case, the iOS project of our Xamarin application, I think the iPhone simulator, because we are actually going to use an iPhone simulator to run these UI tests. If you're using a device, what are you going to use? The iPhone folder. And same thing there, debug. And inside these folders, you'll have this application object here. So the face-off iOS.app file. It's actually not an IPA. Then we specify device identifier. Now where do we grab this from? We can grab this from a device, or we can grab it from a simulator. Now in this case, I'm going to use an Xcode simulator. So if I go to Window, Devices, here are my iPhone simulators. I can grab a simulator here, and I'm going to grab its identifier. And then I'm going to plug that in here. Cool. Alrighty. Now we've set up our app initializer. We've specified the path for our APK and app, Android and iOS projects, and our device serial for our Android device, which is our Samsung S7. And in this case, our device identifier, which is going to be our simulator. Now, obviously, you can see they're still running, but let's close this off. We're going to quit out of that simulator. Alrighty, and we're going to get out of the app and go to the home screen on our Android device. Now, what do? I'm going to create our first test fixture. Now, Xamarin.UITest is built upon the NUnit framework. So I highly recommend that when you're doing UI tests with Xamarin, you use Xamarin.UITest, because the support's much better. You can run all your tests through NUnit. I mean, that's awesome. So you can use console and the terminal-based application for NUnit to run these UI tests. And it will start up the simulators and everything and run the tests. It's fantastic. So let's create a new test fixture. Test fixture. Great. Now, what do? Alrighty, so we need to first, I'm going to specify test fixture. Sorry about the noise from my computer. Platform.Android. Now, because this is a Xamarin Forms application, let me jump into another test fixture and make sure those are the ones we want. Text fixture. Well, that's not going to be the right one. Let's add in our using statements. Xamarin.UITest. Great. So we're going to have a test fixture for both Android and iOS. Inside the constructor, we are going to have a platform. That's in the wrong spot. So that goes above the class. Exactly like NUnit, exactly like you would do in Visual Studio and C#. I mean, this is what's great, because Xamarin's always basing stuff upon .NET, right? So why would you go APM or anything else when you have C#? C#, we want to stick to C#, right? So let's use NUnit. Xamarin.UITest, that's NUnit. Great. Okay, so now in our constructor, we want to pass a platform object. This platform is going to be, we also want to create a local variable. And we are going to initialize that platform, because when these test fixtures are created, when these test fixtures are created, it will pass or initialize, the constructor will be called, and it will receive a platform based upon what platform it's running. If it's iOS, it's going to pass an iOS platform. If it's Android, an Android platform. We have to use this object to create our app. So what's our next part? Public before test. What does this function do? Let's add an attribute called setup, and then let's add another private variable called app. And then app is going to be initialized in this part. Wrong one. We want to say app initializer. So what's app initializer? That's this class we set up before, which I usually like to make it static. Normally when you create a new UI test project, it'll just say class. But we've got one static function, meaning it's a static class. Simple? Great. Now we can go call startup and pass in our platform that was initialized when this test fixture was created. Great. Public void before test. Now in any test fixture, where you specify the setup attribute, that will be the first function that will be called before any tests are run. And we have to do this in Xamarin.UITest because we have to initialize our app object. Because our app object is the reference to your application where we actually start committing UI test commands, pressing buttons, typing in text. We actually reference everything through the iApp object. Great. Now that we've created our app object, we can start writing our UI test. Now, I am going to actually remove my old one. Oh, that could be bad, and I'm going to rebuild. Excuse me. Now that I've built my UI test, I'm going to go to View, and I'm going to go to Test. What we can see here is our app. This is exactly like Visual Studio. Well, it is. It's Visual Studio, but for Mac. Exactly like unit testing has always been. And we'll have our local.UITest, which is the name of our application. And we'll go to our names, it's like a namespace call stack. And inside our local UI test container, we'll have test fixtures, which is our new test fixture here. And then inside here, we'll have new test fixture for Android and iOS because we specified platforms up here. Right? Now, I want to add a test. We specify the test attribute and public void new test1. Great, we've created a test. Now, if I rebuild this project and go to the test window, watch what happens. We get our new test1. And my computer's really powering up now, so it must be doing some work. Alrighty, now for our first test, for our first option for writing tests, we can use app.REPL. Awesome. Let's run and see what REPL does. So if I right click on the new test1, watch what happens here. Give it a moment. Oh, I saw something jump. Something's happening. There we go. Now watch. We should see a terminal. Boom. Okay, so now, there we go. That's REPL. Now I want to start writing my tests. So I'm going to have a look and I'm going to see basically my UI layout as a tree by typing tree. Now we're going to see the entire structure of our layout and see every element contained on the screen that's right in front of us right now. Now I'm just going to do a quick thing called app.flash. Give it the ID, and I'm going to flash the toolbar element. Oh, screensaver. Let me get over that. Now the idea of flash mainly is to give you this. We'll see it flash, the item that we're referencing, and it'll give me ID, description, rectangle, width, height, label, text, class, bit more further details and properties of what that object was, Mainly, it's a good reference that if you're, I don't know if I'm actually going to be referencing the correct element. So a flash is a good way just to show you, okay, yep, that's the element I want to use. So REPL is a way that we can build our sort of UI tests. So I can also then say player1 entry, and I can say app.enter text x. What was that? That was the label, sorry, no. Nope. Nope. Text. And you can enter text into the player1 entry. Oh. One moment. So, actually, sorry. I have to first, I'm taking a shortcut here. Let me just jump back in my application. Okay, so I'm going to tap my entry. Marks is the one I wanted, not text. Sorry about that. See how it tapped on the element there? And then you can say app, enter text. Again, I'm going to just take a shortcut. Oh, sorry, I got out of it. Okay, let's start that again. This is the fun of doing everything on the fly. Give it a moment to run. So obviously you can see how time-consuming REPL can be. App.tap. And we're going to say X marks. Really need to turn off that screensaver. Player1 entry, I think it was called. Right, so I've tapped on the element, then we can say app, enter text. And we're going to say marks, player1 entry. So see, obviously before I can write any text into a text box, I need to tap on it. And then we can say Michael. And it's going to enter the text into the text box like so. So then, if I want to now put this into a unit test, I will, let's call this test. Test, enter text player1. And then inside, obviously, the REPL commands we just wrote, we can copy them in like so. But like, this takes a long time to sort of build your tests. And sometimes I think there's ways to take shortcuts. Now, this is why I love Xamarin, because they came out with this tool. So that's one way of building our test using REPL. Now, I'm going to get rid of that test because we only want to add that test if we're going to use REPL. Let's add another one called test2. And we're going to build this test using test recorder, Xamarin test recorder. Let's restart it. Xamarin test recorder. Jesus, did my computer burn? Now, Test Recorder right now on Mac is not the greatest because it's a separate tool like it was with Xamarin Studio. Visual Studio it's actually integrated with. And I love it how it's integrated. Eventually it will be integrated with Visual Studio for Mac. Right now it's a separate tool which you can download from the Xamarin website. So I'm going to select the device, which is our Samsung, and I'm going to select the face-off app. And what it's going to do, it's going to start the Android application. This will be the exact same for iOS. It will start the app on my Android device. Just give it a moment. It can be a little time consuming, this part. I really love this program. It's really quick and easy to whip up a test. And then sometimes you see with Xamarin Test Recorder, it does miss elements. So what you'll have to do is start REPL. So the two work hand in hand. Alrighty, then we click record. Now as it's recording, watch what I'm doing now. It's going to write the code for me. How good is that? Great. Here's my test. Now I can say stop recording, and I can copy that output and paste. There's my test. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this. What's going on here? Oh, I'm going to end that REPL test. Rebuild the UI test project. And you should see now those two tests update here. Great. Excellent. So we've built our UI tests using REPL and Test Recorder. Stick to the Xamarin.UITest framework. It's the best framework out there for Xamarin applications. Personally, in my opinion, it is the best. It has the best support to it, and I think it just works hand in hand. If you've used NUnit before, it's exactly the same. All right, so let's just test one of these to make sure it's okay. So I'm going to run that last test that we just did. Give it a moment to start up. And what this is going to do, this is just going to perform what I just did in Test Recorder, just to make sure that the test is passing. Because this is a Xamarin Forms application, we can just carry this test straight across to iOS as well. Boy, I love cross-platform. Come on. Running, running, running. Here we go. And let's watch it. We'll enter the name, into the second name. Wait a second, sorry, I ran the first test. So it just ran this test here. Cool. Should have double checked what test I was actually running. And we got a green, so it's a pass. Excellent. So I'm sure you've probably done this before. You've done this before locally with UITest. Now let's see how we can run it off NUnit. Now this is where it gets fun. Okay. Now, we are going to... Whoops, wrong one. One moment while I find just the commands that I was... Quick reference. Okay, cool. So you can actually install NUnit using nuget. And we also want to install ReportUnit as well, which I'll get to in a minute. Now you can use msbuild as well. And this will rebuild your UI test projects. And you're going to want to do this. If you're going to do it in a continuous integrated build pipeline, you're going to want to call that local UI test rebuild on every single time your Android code rebuilds as well. Because it will need to create a new DLL file for NUnit to run. Now, what we can do is once we've installed NUnit, our NUnit.Runner, we can then specify, we have to actually run if I go to the folder application where I've actually installed it, let's do that first so we can see for context. Great. So here in my applications folder, this is my console runner for NUnit, and it's going to use the NUnit3-console.exe tool with the Mono framework. Now, Mono has to be installed on your Mac, and it will be installed obviously already if you're building a Xamarin application. So we can just say Mono, specify the path, and we want to use NUnit3.console.exe. Now, inside the local UITests project, we have bin, debug, and a DLL file that's created. So I don't want to do any more but this test. So I'm just going to do this for, you know what, let's do 2 tests. Okay, so we then need to specify the path to this. So we've got Mono, the first, which is the Mono framework, and we're going to pass in the executable NUnit3 console application. And then we're going to pass in our UITest.dll file. And let's run. So all it's going to do, this is basically what Test Cloud does. It's running our UI tests on Android. Look at it go. Ready? And iOS. Now let's watch it go. So this is using NUnit to run the test. How cool is this? I'm not actually doing this through Xamarin. Sorry, through Visual Studio. Okay, great. Now see, it's giving. I mean, this is all done through the console. So this is where it becomes really useful because I can plug this straight into Bash scripting and automated scripting. And I can automate this entire thing. And this is not on Test Cloud. I can attach this to internal networks, third-party devices, and really bring out tests even to another. So here we go. It's opening up the simulator for iOS now. Wait for the simulator to start. Come on. Sometimes I really hate Apple. Visor is such a good application. While this is loading, so this is where it's kind of good in a way as well. Like this just simply waits for your iOS simulator to start, then it'll run. I think it might actually time out, so hopefully it doesn't time out. But again, at the end of this NUnit run, which is happening right now, you will get results. Sorry about the screensaver. We'll get results from this NUnit test run into a XML file, which we can then build reports upon. And that's where I'm going to introduce you to ReportUnit, which is another NUnit tool, and that will take an XML result file from an NUnit run and give you a nice sort of report representation in HTML, which we just open in a browser. Alright, so here it goes now running the iOS version. Screensaver again. It's really starting to annoy me. Just ignore that pop-up that came. That's based upon my laptop security. It's asking about, asking about device agent and getting approval. So it's going to do the same test. There were two tests. One was just the one we built off REPL, and then the other one was the one we built using Test Recorder. And see, it's giving me the actual output of what the tests are doing. Appium doesn't give you this option to do this sort of thing. This is where NUnit and Xamarin.UITest work hand in hand. I've really got to turn off that security measure. And then it's going to run the second test. Great, okay. Now we have test summary, 4 passed, 0 failed, start and end time, that's excellent. So let's now jump into the project, the Xamarin app folder, and have a look at, jumping too far ahead, TestResult.xml. Now this is basically the results generated in XML format. Any NUnit run will always generate an XML file. You can actually specify an output path where you want this to go. All depends. You can even customize and specify test fixtures like this. And I can specify my fixture like that and just run specific fixtures and also then specify an output path like so. And I can also specify that output file as a TXT, not an XML, whatever you prefer. But then, anyway, let's clear that off and let's have a look at ReportUnit. This is really cool. We have to use mono again. So the first thing we do is we specify mono and going to jump into where I've installed ReportUnit. And we just simply pass in the executable file. And we also pass in our XML file. And click enter. Simple. Let's open this up with Chrome. And voila. 4 tests. We can even jump in and see the test fixtures and the tests that are run in each fixture. We can even filter it. Errors, inclusive, skipped, all this sort of stuff. I mean, this is creating your own test cloud locally. So this is again, when it comes to third-party device integration, things that are a bit out of scope that Test Cloud can do, we can do this instead. Great. So that's everything. I mean, now for this next piece, I will show you on the next video how we can then integrate this into our Visual Studio Team Services continuous integration build. And that's where it gets really cool. Thanks a lot, guys. We'll have more for you soon.